I would like now to introduce the final speaker, Joel Mokyr. He is the Robert Strauss Professor of Arts and Sciences and Professor of Economics and History in Northwestern. He basically, you could claim, is the person who invented the field of economic history. He also has another name appointment, the Sackler Professor and Etienne Berglas Professor in the School of Economics in Tel Aviv. He specializes in economic history and the economics of technological and population change. One book that you may want to look at that is very relevant to what we are discussing here is called The Enlightened Economy, published by Yale University Press. And coincidentally, Joel is also from Yale. Joel.
Thank you very much. I'm going to attack the questions underlying the topics of this meeting as straight on as I can by essentially raising 3 points. One is, how likely is it for the rate of innovation that we've experienced over the last, say, century and a half to continue? Or is it true that all the sort of low-hanging fruits have been picked and the rest is sort of a mopping up operation? And secondly, what will its effect be on the future of work? And finally, and I'll be very brief about this, is there something policymakers can and should do about it? Or should we just let things move on their own? So question one, I'm going to be very unequivocal and very clear about this. My view is that there are far more fruits on this tree, and you wonder if this is the tree of knowledge or not, it is a moot question, but there are far more fruits on this tree than the eye can see. All we have to do is build taller ladders. And in fact, that is precisely what scientists are doing for us. They are building taller ladders so we can climb higher up that tree and pick the fruits on the top. So as far as technology is concerned, despite the huge amount of innovation that we've experienced in the last 150 years, my very short and colloquial answer is, you ain't seen nothing yet. So why do I say this? So you think a little bit about what moves technology, and of course it doesn't just move by itself, it's moved by something deeper, and what that a deeper thing, oops, I did something dumb here. I'm trying to, okay, sorry. It doesn't move by itself, it's moved by something deeper. It's moved by our knowledge of natural regularities and phenomena. Now, in the past, that wasn't always the case. People invented things by trial and error, or by serendipity, or by sheer luck. But let me tell you, you're not going to accidentally build the first nuclear reactor. You have to know something about nuclear science, and everything we heard from my predecessors pointed out. They have to know what they're doing. There is no room for accident. But science, of course, doesn't move by itself either. It needs many things to move ahead at full speed. And one of the things that are underrated, but I think extremely important, is in fact the tools that science uses. And much of that is hardware, instruments and tools to observe, test, experiment, compute, search for information, and so on. Now, it gets this from technology. And so we have essentially a very primitive model of positive feedback in which science and technology aid and abet one another, and that actually provides us with a very nice key of understanding what's been happening over the last 100 years and why we should be optimistic. In the past, great flourishings of science have always been stimulated by the inventions of skilled instrument makers or artisans. Of course, sometimes these scientists and the artisans were the same person. Galileo built himself the first telescope by which he looked at the stars. But clearly they needed those tools. And where would Galileo have been without his telescope, or Pasteur without his microscope? Or where would chemistry have been without the voltaic cell that was invented in 1800 and that allowed chemists for the first time to do electrolysis? So what we have today, ladies and gentlemen, dwarfs anything we've had in the past. Pasteur never had anything like this. Oops, I keep doing this. Never had anything like this. This is the tool for which they just gave the Nobel Prize this year. This is a basic health type of stimulated emission depletion microscope in which we can actually see things at the molecular level. And he would, I'm sure if Pasteur had something like this, he would have gotten a great deal faster where he went. Neither did Galileo have anything like this. This is an artist's impression of the European extremely large telescope that is deploying lasers for adaptive optics. And the difference of picture that you get from a thing like this is quite striking. On the left, you see a picture of the planet Uranus, made by a regular telescope. On the right, exactly the same image, made by an adaptive telescope using modern computer technology. You can see the difference. With better tools, we can observe better. And nobody had this. This is the fastest computer in the world as of 6 months ago. It probably may not be it anymore. This is the massive liquid-cooled supercomputer known as the Sequoia. It's at Lawrence Livermore National Labs, and it can actually does 16.3 petaflops per second. A petaflop is a quintillion floating operations per second. It is an astonishingly fast computer, and yet, of course, it is just scratching the surface. In 10 years, this will be obsolete technology. So in any area of research, from nanotechnology to econometrics to medieval poetry, people don't ask, what are computers doing for science? They ask, how in the world did anybody do any research in the age before we had computers? So as the tools of science continue to improve, science will advance faster and faster. And we will know more about the genetics of living beings, about nanostructures, quantum chemistry, the human brain, and everything else. And the technology based on that knowledge will advance. And so what it will do, among other things, and we heard about this from previous speakers, it will build better robot-like machines that will not only mimic the human hand and the arm, as machines did 150 years ago, and can move faster, but we build now machines that can hear, see, smell, sense, read barcodes, and possibly, and very soon already text, manipulate, organize, communicate, and perhaps think like us and make snap decisions. So, if this were to happen, ask yourself, what will happen to work? And so a historian's first reaction, and this is not by way of copping out, but just giving a notion that this is not the first time we're running into this. We have seen this movie before, more than once. And in the past, if you go back 200 years, workers, just as they do today, feared that machines would replace them and make them redundant. And as a result, they strongly resisted mechanization. Here on the left, you have a famous picture of the Luddite movement. Today, the word Luddite is basically anybody who doesn't like technology. But the Luddites were actually a physical movement. They were active in England in between period of 1811 and 1816, roughly speaking, and mostly in the county of Nottinghamshire and Lancashire. And basically, what you see two guys here breaking this cotton printing machine because they were afraid it would put them out of a job. Now, a century later, we have something similar happening to us in the United States. On the left column, the one with the circle around it, you see, and Julio already alluded to this, in the beginning of this nation, around 3/4 of the people were engaged in agriculture. On the eve of the Civil War, it's still more than half. By the end of the 20th century, we're down to 2.5%. The question is, what happened to these jobs? Where did these people go? Well, you see on the right, you see some of them went into manufacturing, but actually not that many. After 1950, the proportion of manufacturing goes down. And after that, we get people going to domestic services, clerical sales, transportation, communication, things like that. Jobs opened up. And that, of course, is the big lesson to take from history. We mechanized away a lot of jobs, but the economy did not collapse. The streets were not filled with millions of desperate, unemployed, and unemployable workers. And so far, the evidence of technologically induced long-term unemployment is basically non-existent. But maybe this time it's different. Maybe the new technology, which will be much faster and much more powerful, will really be so fast that job creation may not keep up. And if that happens, there's no way of knowing for sure, of course, that it will happen or not, but I would like to make 3 observations on that point. The first is that we distinguish in technological change between two kinds of changes. We have what we call process innovation, by which we make the same goods we made before, only we make them cheaper, faster, because using less labor. And we have product innovation, in which we create altogether new products. And so classical productivity increase will, of course, make some workers redundant under certain conditions, not necessarily so, as they are replaced by machines, by automatons, by robots who can do their jobs faster, cheaper, never get sick, never go on strike. But product innovation creates new jobs that were never imagined before. And you carry out this mental experiment and ask yourself, in 1914, you'd go to somebody and tell them that their great-grandchildren would have jobs such as video game designers, or cybersecurity specialists, or GPS programmers, or veterinary psychiatrists. They would think you're out of your mind. They wouldn't have the faintest clue what you're talking about. And so what I would like to suggest is that our imaginations aren't powerful enough to imagine the jobs that will be there in 2050, but the likelihood is that they will be there. And so jobs will be created. The second observation I'd like to make is that even though we will be working, work will not be what it used to be. And here's something to keep in mind. Before 1800, the vast majority of people worked. I think basically everybody worked. But people, by and large, worked at their homes for themselves, choosing their own hours and to work on what they wanted. This was true for farmers, it was true for artisans, it's also true for shopkeepers and almost anybody in the economy. Now, the Industrial Revolution changed all that. It created factories, which Marx wrote about with great eloquence, but it also created what we call the factory system. And the factory system basically involves that your work will take place in a space and a time slot that your employer sets for you. You are under constant supervision, you're under constant monitoring, and that will be the nature of work. And so because of that feature, we have created the concept of a one-to-one long-term relation between employee and employer, which is what we call today a job. But in fact, that is a relatively recent invention. Before 1800, people worked, they did not have jobs. Instead, they would be what we would call today somewhat anachronistically independent contractors. So by 1914 or so, this system was in place in most of the US and in the Western economies, and most people who worked then had jobs and were receiving a wage or a salary, whether they were proletarians, factory workers, or whether they were professionals like college professors. But what I'm suggesting to you is that modern technology has started to make dents in this system, and the pendulum may be swinging back to a system that is very different, of course, than what we have, because we're not going back to the way medieval artisans worked in their cottages. But what I think is happening is that more and more work is already and more and more will be farmed out to these independent contractors who work for themselves. Another possibility, or complementary with that, will be telecommuting. People will be working from wherever they want to work, not necessarily from home. I see people working, on the airport. I see them work on airplanes. People work on the beach. People work from anywhere because distance, it may not be quite dead, but it ain't what it used to be. And so what will the future of nature of work be? And of course, there's no way of knowing, but I suggest to you that a rigid employment contract, well defined by time and space, is slowly but certainly becoming obsolete. And the boundary between working and not working, between labor and leisure, will become increasingly fuzzy, as already it is for lots of workers, including, I dare say, college professors. And finally, let me end by playing name dropper and quoting at some length what a very, very famous economist you've all heard of said about this matter in a somewhat less known piece. This is the great John Maynard Keynes himself, who wrote a little pamphlet, just a few pages long, really, called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. And I'd like to sort of basically recite a few telling lines. This is almost a century ago, ladies and gentlemen. And here's what he's saying. He's saying, we're suffering now from a bad attack of economic pessimism. It is common to hear people say that the epoch of enormous economic progress which characterized the 19th century is over, that the rapid improvement in the standard of living is going to slow down. Well, and then he adds, I believe, quite rightly, that this is a wildly mistaken interpretation of what is happening to us. We are suffering, he says, not from the rheumatics of old age. Man could write, couldn't he? But from the growing pains of over-rapid changes, from the painfulness of readjustment between one economic period and another. The increase, and this is my emphasis, the increase of technical efficiency has been taking place faster than we can deal with the problem of labor absorption. The improvement in the standard of life has been a little too quick. But then, he says something very important. He says, for the moment, the very rapidity of these changes is hurting us and bringing difficult problems to solve. We are being afflicted by a new disease, namely technological unemployment. Well, this means that unemployment, due to our discovery of means of economizing the use of labor, which is productivity increase, right, outrunning the pace at which we can find new uses for labor. But this, Keynes adds, is only a temporary phase of maladjustment. All this means that in the long run, mankind, sorry about the politically incorrect use of gender, mankind is solving its economic problem. And this is how he sees the future. Thus, for the first time since his creation, man will be faced with his permanent problem, how to use his freedom from pressing economic cares, how to occupy the leisure which science and compound interest, meaning investment, have won for him to live wisely and agreeably and well. We shall do more things for ourselves than is usual with the rich today, only too glad to have small duties and tasks and routines. 3-hour shifts of 15-hour work weeks may put off the problem for a great while. For 3 hours a day is quite enough to satisfy the old Adam in us. So the old Adam, of course, refers to the famous biblical statement that God made to Adam when he said, in thy sweat of thy brow thou shalt eat bread, right? That's what he means by Adam. And he says, this may no longer be true. Now, what Keynes failed to see, and this is my own addition, is that the danger is, and here I'm coming back to some of the things that Malcolm was saying, that these benefits seem to accrue only to a few. And the technological progress he's talking about creates a huge gap between the haves and the have-nots. And so inequality may yet undo Keynes's utopian dream unless we do something about it. And this is where policymakers can, of course, intervene. So one way to think about it is that the blessing of an ever more bountiful technology are a bit like a major oil discovery. It's a huge windfall to an economy. Okay? We are getting a lot richer. But windfalls, much like oil discoveries, can be treated well and can be treated poorly. We can treat it like Norway did and become a progressive welfare state in which most share in the blessings, or like Russia and Nigeria, where the blessings are stashed away for the benefits of a kleptocratic oligarchy. And that's, of course, where politics comes in. The issue is not so much a matter of will there be jobs or where will the jobs be, but one of distribution. And how will the blessings of science and ingenuity be disseminated to all of humankind? If nothing is changed, Keynes's utopian vision will not come to pass. Not because there aren't enough fruits on the tree, but because of growing opposition to a system that is deemed unfair and benefiting to a few. Thank you.